Kia ora tātou, everyone, and welcome to this really important council meeting on Monday, the 24th of July. Great to look out and see a lot of people there. Just a reminder then, in terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, we make our way out the door at the back there and assemble across the road from the council building and wait for staff instructions. Everyone needs to be aware that this meeting is being live streamed, and I'm sure we've got lots of people listening in because it is a really important day for the city of Tauranga today. And the video will be publicly available on YouTube. And just a reminder, we'll have several presentations today. Just a reminder to make sure that you are speaking directly into the microphone. It does, as you move your head around, we do lose the sound. And can I just ask people to either turn off their mobile phones or put them onto silent, please? Shad, would you like to open with a karakia, please?
Tēnā koe, Anne. Huri aki rā kia tātou katoa, ko huitahi nei tēnei ata. Me ki rā ngā kaimahi, e ngā maima o te hāpuri, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Nō reira, me tīmata hoki tātou, me tuku karakia, nō reira kia noi tātou. I te atua anei rā mātou upona ngai nete nei ki a koe i tēnei ata, ka tuku ngā whakamoimiti, ngā whakawhetai ki a koe, mau manaake tanga katoa. Manaaki tia rā tātou i ngā ahotanga, i ngā take, nunui e hora nei, kia whaihua, huarahi tika mā tātou katoa. Nō reira te atua tēnei mātuina, tēnei ki a koe, korora ki tō ngā tapu. Āmina.
Shad. So no apologies, we're all here. That brings us to the public forum, and we have two speakers today in the public forum, John Robson and Nigel Tutt. If we start with John, would you like to come up to the table, John? You're going to speak on Te Manawataki or Te Papa and the stadium, just bearing in mind that the council has made no decision on the stadium. Welcome, you've got 5 minutes.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, look, the reason I'm here really is just to put some things down as a matter of public record. I have absolutely no doubt that in this chamber today there will be little debate and that just about every recommendation will be accepted without discussion. As a matter of fact, I believe, and I have evidence to support that belief, that most of the discussions have already happened. That being said, for the record, as a councillor, I objected to this process and much of it from the beginning. The way people were bounced into the partnering agreement with Willis Bond and just about every step that followed. I thought it was an insult to democracy, basically, but we are where we are. And as I say, I think the decisions today are pretty much a foregone conclusion. That being said, I did make the effort to go through all the reports for the agenda and the business case. And I'd just like to raise one or 2 points, because with only 5 minutes, now less than 4, you don't have much time. Yes, coming to work to fire bullets, not really a good idea, but hey, let's hope it ends well. Issues I've got, the sunk cost fallacy that's being used. Make no mistake that if the right people, in my view, are elected in next year's election, a lot of this will be reversed. It doesn't stand. Make no mistake. The media coverage of this has been appalling. They report, and they haven't yet changed that report, even though I believe they know it to be wrong, that the ratepayers are up for 70 million. It's not 70 million, it's not 151.5, it is significantly more than that. And anyone who's capable of the least amount of financial analysis would understand how you'd come to know that the figure will be significantly more than 151.5. It's interesting to note that in the business case, the cost up to 2029 is recorded as $440 million, $130 million of OPEX. OPEX are real costs paid for by ratepayers. If you look at the net present value of the additional OPEX for these collection of initiatives, 26 million a year plus, the numbers are frightening and an enormous burden on our ratepayers. There is acknowledgement in the business case that these types of initiatives, programs are frequently wrought with confirmation bias, and the irony is they then go on to do an upside-only sensitivity analysis. Neutral and optimistic, there was no pessimistic analysis done. The discount rate they use at 4% is obscene, absolutely obscene. And some of the numbers that are put in there, quite frankly, the line which says Maori value of Maori cultural expression, 161.1 million, 20% of the return, that's a taniwha. It's going to bite you. Also like a taniwha, it's a fiction. The 21 million, 5% of the total cost, it is not an enabling amount. It's friction. It will be lost. The numbers in the business case and many of the reports that you are receiving today don't match. How much are you spending on the waterfront? According to the business case, you're spending 80 plus million. According to page 109, paragraph 6, the budget is 32.9 million. According to page 30, in the reports you're receiving in today's agenda, the budget is less than 25.6 million. How much are you spending on the waterfront? I think the public have a right to know. But reading the reports and reading this business case, the public will know very little. Most of them won't have the wherewithal, the time, the skills to go through this, deconstruct it, and realise that, and I say this without irony in 25 seconds to go, that when this work is stored for public perusal later on, it will go into your proposed library in the fiction section, absolute fiction. And unfortunately, like a lot of false beliefs, it will hurt real people. I promised I'd be done in 5 minutes. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Can we have Nigel, please? Welcome. 5 minutes.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much. I won't be 5. I'm here speaking in support of Tauranga City Council investment in the Te Manawataki o Te Papa precinct. Unfortunately, the CBD here is not something that people from Tauranga can always be proud of, and it's been a concern for a long period of time. There's been many discussions, and they most of them predate you being installed as a commission. So I thought I'd give a little bit of context. Most of those were with the investment and development community. And to create a vibrant and growing CBD, we need a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, all working towards the same goal. In the past, and despite some good intentions, there have been barriers for private developers and investors in the city, and council governance and action, or lack of action, has been one of those barriers. For the private sector, there is always risk in investments, and they need to know specifically to hear that the Tauranga CBD is going to be a place that will continue to grow and not continue to be orphaned, really. And the way that a council would show this is by simply investing in that CBD. That gives a very, very clear signal to people. Unfortunately, council has historically not provided investors with that confidence, has been indecisive, and in some cases been quite disparaging towards the very people that would help them grow that CBD. Those investors have simply just chosen to do things either elsewhere, like Hamilton, or not at all. And we see that in what we have there today. The CBD blueprint that we released last year showed about $1.5 billion worth of investment that we think is going to happen in the CBD over the course of this decade. At this point in time, that investment, a year later, that investment only looks stronger than what it was. In fact, we've got a briefing to an audience later this week where we'll showcase 7 of those developments. So this is definitely happening. And a large part of why it's happening is because of the confidence that we've been able to show in civic investments, and people think they can get behind those. Council's not responsible for the entire investment and regeneration of a CBD, but it plays a very, very important role in signalling to the market that this is a place to be and a place where they can safely invest and do the right things. And critically, council also needs to play its role in investing in only the things that a council can. So those are the people and civic investments. So we all know there's a lot of potential here. And to realise this potential of this great city, we need to have council and the private sector working in concert. And that's why I'm here to support the Te Manawa Taki o Te Papa investment. I think it'll be a good thing for the city and it will certainly encourage further private investment. Thanks.
Nigel, you've still got a couple of minutes. Are there any questions for Nigel? No? All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So on with the agenda. So we have a late item, which is a report from Te Manawa Taki o Te Papa Limited Board that's been tabled. And we have Board Chair Kim Wallace here with us, who will speak to that later in the meeting. Can I have a mover, please, Shad, and a seconder, Bill, to accept this item? Late item is an item of business. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So, confidential business to be transferred into the open. I don't think we have any. Change to the order of business. So, I'm not going to read it all out, but I just make the point to those that are here with us today and those that are listening in, because so we've got a number of reports on the table, and in order to do it in to make the decisions in an orderly fashion, we may have to leave some lying on the table whilst we make consequent decisions and then go back. So bear with us. We'll try and do it as seamlessly as we can, but in order to come to the right conclusions, we have to do it in a particular order. And that will become clear, I think, as the meeting progresses. So all that sounds very complicated, but in the meantime, we've got the minutes from the council meeting that was held on the 3rd of July. Are there any questions or changes to those minutes? Bill moving that's a true and correct record, and Stephen seconding. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of conflict of interest? No. No, we have no deputations, presentations or petitions, and we have no recommendations from other committees. So that brings us to the first report today, which is the overview report. And that is over to you, Mr. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I could perhaps just provide a very brief and recent history to the Civic precinct and the proposed development in the papers before us today. So in 2018, the Council of the Day adopted a master plan for the development of the Civic precinct. That sat on the table for a number of years, and in 2021, December 2021, the Council adopted the revised master plan. In 2022, through the long-term plan amendment process, Council made the decision to include $303 million in the long-term plan in the budget to proceed with the development, half of which was to be funded by the ratepayer, half was to be funded through alternate means. Late last year, Council resolved with the Otamataha Trust a long-standing grievance, which saw the site, as we know it, move into a co-ownership arrangement through a charitable trust. Earlier this year, we set up a council-controlled organisation, a governance delivery board, to oversee the delivery of this program. There are a number of gateways that were needed to be met in order for Council to proceed with this, one of which was the completion of a detailed business case. Another one was the development of a financial strategy, and of course the cost estimates and final designs is something that you'll see with you today. Today, the reports will cover many of those issues and, in my view, provide confidence for the Commission to proceed with this program. And finally, I'd like just to commend staff and our partnering consultants in the preparation of these papers for today's meeting. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Marty, and I think it is important to note that this is a process that has gone on for a long period of time. And it's fair to say that there's been a lot of talk. I know when we moved out of the old council buildings into the new, where we're currently temporary accommodation, and we opened up all the cupboards, there were lots of different plans that fell out that had been talked about, both around the council table and with the community. And as that happened, the centre of the city, the heart of the city, was starting to be hollowed out, as we saw, like most cities around New Zealand, as they grow, those malls set up and the big chains move their shops, their retail out into those malls. And it's really important that councils, as we've heard from Nigel today, partner with the private sector to maintain that centre of the city. And you see it as you look around New Zealand, you look at what Auckland has been trying to do, what Christchurch has done, and of course had a blank canvas to work with following the tragic earthquakes. And of course Wellington is trying to do it too, to keep that centre city as the heart of that city. And whilst all the talk has been happening here in Tauranga around the table and amongst the community, that heart has been hollowed out. And I had the unfortunate opportunity this morning to go on television and talk, because someone had actually photographed our main street, wandered down, a visitor to the city had wandered down the main street and photographed all the empty shops that were up for lease. And we were there in the national media as a city that had died, where the heart had died. So that hasn't happened overnight, and that has happened because the council did not partner and rebuild or maintain that centre of the city. So I take my hat off to the heroes that are still there, doing business every day in a city that has a pretty miserable sort of a footfall outside their premises. So we've been told by the community again and again and again, and it's interesting that even TET, who went out to the community asking for opinion as to whether they should support what we're doing today, there was overwhelming support for the community for them to contribute. So we've been told by the community it's time for action, and today marks the start of that. A long journey. I think, one of our first experiences was in that old council building, looking at that deserted floor of council with the calendar up there from December 2014. And that's when the discussions really began. And hopefully today we will make the decision to redress what is 8 years of neglect of the centre of this magnificent city. So I have no questions, but does anyone else have any questions on that overview report? Are you moving that we receive that, Stephen?
Happy to move, Chair. Yeah.
Shad, you want to speak? You want to second and you want to speak?
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Marty, for that overview. Just reflecting on your comments, Anne, and also from others this morning, Te Manawataki does sit within a broader context of our city centre, and hearing the commentary around how our centre has evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. And that was one of the focuses when the Commission came in, was yes, we needed to invest in community infrastructure. We also needed to invest in our transport system to enable the city to develop and grow over time. And one of those areas is our city centre. And it does sit within that broader context of the university as an education precinct, the development of retail, particularly up this end of town with the Farmers Building. And we have seen that evolve and change over time as well. Sits within that context of its underlying history. So the Heritage Precinct up towards Cliff Road and Otamataha, and how we protect and connect those areas together. And also the recreational areas, particularly around the domain, and how we connect our community from a recreational perspective down into our city. And then hospitality along the waterfront, which is still a great place to eat and recreate during the weekend. And we still see a lot of people down there. And Te Manawataki sits within that broader context of our city centre. But all of these things need to connect. They all need to play their part. And the private sector also has a role in bringing investment back into our city. Being a long-term resident, being born here in Tauranga, and seeing a thriving city centre growing up right through to my early working life, and then seeing the demise of it now, is in some ways quite disheartening. But actually, we do have a plan. The previous councils had plans, but in a lot of ways, from my observations and my perspective, failed to deliver on those plans. And we have an opportunity today to link all of that together and actually set a pathway to deliver on those aspirations. So those are my comments from this morning.
No question, Chair, but I'd just like to make a few comments following on from Shad. And certainly we'd moved here in 1985. So over a period of time, I've actually seen the demise of the city centre. And a number of past decisions have not assisted in terms of the city centre. We have a very dispersed commercial and business activities throughout the city. So it's quite different in terms of other cities, whether that's Hamilton, Palmerston North, the Napiers of the world, etc., etc. I think one of the, and those past decisions have often been made, you know, the great market will provide, and that's the best place for some of those commercial and business decisions to be made. And that hasn't been borne out. I think if I use Hamilton as an example, where there had been some significant development outside of the city centre that provided or assisted in the demise of that city centre over a long period of time. The investment and commitment of Hamilton City, and certainly over the last 8 to 10 years, both in terms of having the right planning frameworks, but also putting in the right level of investment, whatever that is, together with the private sector, over time is actually turning that city centre around. And that investment in the public spaces has been significant in actually turning that CBD to face one of its major assets, the river. The reason I raise that is I see in terms of Te Manawataki o Te Papa, the whole re-energising and redevelopment of the city centre as doing something similar to what's actually occurred in Hamilton, but also providing a centre, and as a resident here for a long period of time, that we can be proud of. Secondly, it's a place that we can take and meet people, and actually providing the opportunity, and picking up Shad's point, that opportunity for the city centre to further enhance the whole tertiary education role, that role for office development, professional offices, and essentially boutique retail, together with entertainment and that type of thing. So really supportive in terms of that work that's been done to date, and that overview that Marty and what's in the report in terms of that key role for Te Manawataki o Te Papa and the wider city centre redevelopment. It is one of those opportunities that don't come along that often in terms of providing for an integration of all that development. And Shad's talked about, and I think you mentioned, the whole raft of plans and initiatives in the past. And there's been some good initiatives. Often those have been quite discrete. They've been quite separate from one another, whereas this opportunity in terms of providing, in terms of the precinct, a range of activity, and also that integrated campus approach. So I see it different from some of the previous plans and planning that's been undertaken, but also that opportunity of something that works together, and not just for those who live here and filling some significant gaps in the amenities, but also potentially those who keep coming here at the rate of 3,000 to 4,000 a year. So just wanted to perhaps record or make those comments, Chair, in terms of how I saw the nature and the role of the precinct and the wider city centre.
Yeah, I will add my comments, because my colleagues have spoken about the significance of this project to the CBD and how we want to encourage private sector investment and the integrated approach to city development. And I totally agree with those views. And in fact, I see Te Manawataki o Te Papa with that translation into English, the heartbeat of Te Papa, being fundamental to the future growth of the city. We have significant investment going in as we speak in Cameron Road, with the intention that that will enable urban intensification along Cameron Road towards the city centre. And Te Manawataki o Te Papa provides the cultural heart of that new intensified urban development of our city. We can continue to sprawl out into the burbs, as traditionally Tauranga has grown, but we know that increasingly that creates more and more car dependence, more and more carbon emissions, more and more congestion, and a city that really continues to sprawl. This is our opportunity to change that direction and reshape how the city will grow into the future, enabling more intensified live, work, learn, play along Cameron Road and into our city centre. It also opens up tremendous opportunities for the existing suburbs from Bethlehem to Otamotai to have a city centre that they can be proud of, can use and bring people to. I don't support the views of John Robson, who presented on behalf of some thinkers in this city. I see it as a very negative approach to city building. And when we came here in 2021, we saw the legacy of that indecision. We saw the legacy of not being prepared to make an investment in the future of the city, and to always look at the costs and never consider the wider benefits. We're going to have a business case presented to us later in this meeting, which does look at the wider social, economic, cultural and environmental benefits, because they are environmental as well in terms of how we shape the future of the city. And those costs have been quantified insofar as one can quantify what is, in many respects, intangible, social, community, amenity benefits that any city of any significance has as a fundamental foundation of the city, but the city doesn't. And this is our opportunity to really put a heart in the city centre. Notwithstanding the difficulty in quantifying those benefits, the case is very clear in the business case, and we'll go into that shortly. And I intend to probe into some of those areas when we come to question and consider that business case. But to me, conceptually, this is the right thing to do for the city. It will give the city back its true meaning. It will celebrate the culture and history of the city. And you can dismiss the cultural benefits, John, but actually the city has a significant and important role in the history of New Zealand and how we came together as two cultures, and having a museum in the heart of that development that will help us tell that story and educate our young about how the city was formed and the role that it played is fundamental to the future development of the city, and a tremendous opportunity and one we should capitalise on. So whilst it's easy to be negative, whilst it's easy to be cynical, what we're actually standing for here is a brave commitment about the future of this city, and all of the data that we're going to be considering today and the detailed analysis supports that. And to me, that's where the decision lies. And I look forward to progressing through the various decisions that we have to make today, because this is our opportunity to make a difference for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for reminding us of the perhaps one of the most contentious parts of the Te Manawa-Taki o Te Papa, which is the museum, which this community has debated over many, many years. But I think for me, the image of that young man who came and talked to us in the long-term plan amendment hearing last year, who challenged us with this question of where do I go? Tell me, in this city, where do I go to learn about the history of my city? You haven't provided that. Still rings in my ears. Okay, so we have we can receive. We have been moved and seconded to receive this report, the overview report. Any further comments? All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the design and cost update report, and we should have had Wayne Silver with us, but he is fog in Auckland has delayed his flight, so he's going to join us online. And I take it, Gareth, you're going to lead off. It's just all dropped.
I think
Wayne's just dropped out, but
yeah, we might need to take a short adjournment while we get the technology side of Wayne presenting sorted, but let's see how the team's going.
you can put your camera on, Wayne.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you. We can't see you.
It said my camera's been disabled by the host, which I think is you, Anne. So you're exuding great power over my computer.
Don't look that bad, Wayne.
We do have Wayne's presentation to flick through, so we might not need to see his pretty face.
I can hear you loud and clear. If you can hear me, if you want to proceed straight to the presentation, if that's appropriate.
the technology is going to drive us nuts. But I think what we will do is proceed with the presentation.
So apologies for our technology issues this morning. It's actually a fog out of Auckland Airport, so Wayne wasn't able to get here this morning. It is my pleasure on behalf of Mike and the rest of the team to present the Te Manawa o Te Papa Design and Cost Update report. As you will have noted from the report, we're at a variety of stages of design for each of the different parts of the project, and we've invited Wayne Silver today, who is the Director of Willis Bond, to talk through those different projects and where they are at, with a particular focus on cost and time, and then be available to answer any questions. So if you can hear us, Wayne, over to you.
I can hear you loud and clear, Gareth. Can you hear me all right?
We sure can.
Well, while the technology is working, let's proceed. I understand, have I got 15 minutes allocated? Is that correct? Correct. Great. Okay, I'll press forward. So apologies for Auckland's weather. You won't believe this, but I'm bathed in sunshine in the CPD, and it looks like the only fog in the whole place is centred around the airport, but it is what it is. So thank you for this opportunity to present the report. I'll proceed on through it now. I just want to acknowledge the enormous effort that's gone into this by the design team, by Ryan McCain and Andrew Elliott at Willis Bond, and also Mike Norday's team and council. I mean, it's been a tremendous team effort. And I feel like I'm representing a cast of thousands here this morning and presenting it. I thought I'd start with this slide, and I think it's a really interesting slide for the commissioners, just to understand the context of where we are in a process, because we're in a process and we are on a journey taking our design from an idea to reality. And those various design stages are listed below on this table. And so we move from concept design, preliminary, developed, through finally to detailed design, which effectively becomes the construction template that enables construction to take place. And we have a series of packages that Te Manawa o Te Papa is composed of, and those packages are necessarily at different stages of their design evolution, from those that are virtually complete, like Masonic Park, which is at the most advanced stage. And in fact, that is out for, those designs are out for construction pricing at the moment, through to what we have, the acronym that we've called CWEM, which is the Civic Whare Exhibition and Museum Buildings, collectively CWEM, which is still in developed design phase, about 50 to 60% through. It's very important that readers to the report just hold those processes in their mind, because as design is evolved and given greater certainty, so our pricing becomes more and more precise on the way through. So the prices that are associated with the most advanced design works are the most accurate that we can table at this point in time in the process. And you'll notice, and I'm kind of coming to the end here, but for instance, Masonic Park is actually been, has a budget, an estimated budget now, which is below the costings we estimated in December 2022, which was our last major update for council. So that's extremely encouraging in that piece of work. Masonic Park is the most advanced, so we've had the greatest opportunity as a team to actually flesh out where savings can be made and crystallise costs to the greatest degree possible prior to construction tendering. Library Community Hub project is at a stage where we are commencing detailed design. So we have finished developed design. So that is the second most advanced package of work. And those processes are consistent with the order of construction we're going to see on Te Manawa o Te Papa, provided the council today, give the green light to the various funding packages. I won't go all the way through each of the elements, but I think it's quite clearly illustrated there. And really the art gallery package, which is a pretty minor in terms of quantum in the overall budget, is the least developed, and also Bay Court, which is really hasn't really commenced a lot of detailed planning, and the scope of Bay Court is still being debated by council. Next slide, please. Just a brief update on where we are in terms of the design for the library and community hub buildings. So what we have here is an enormous amount of work has been completed since the December update. As I've said, the developed design is complete now, and we're into the detailed design phase. We've had a lot of stakeholder engagement with the customer services and library teams, which has really enabled the design team to understand and position those activities throughout the building in a high degree of specificity. We've had IT and AV team engagement with council through every room in the building, and we've had an interior design literally for every space within the building. So we know carpet colours, we know wall coverings, and so forth. So there's a lot of detail that has been concluded in this package of work, and we've had a lot of work on the facade as well. So we've had the ability to, in terms of informing our pricing, where because of the state of the design, the advanced state of the design, we have been able to go out for indicative pricing on the wooden aspects of this structure, which is a very significant part of the cost, and arguably one which has a higher degree of variability than a lot of the other trades because of the relatively emerging nature of this building technology. So we literally have tendered pricing for the wood component for community hub library building, which has informed the pricing that we'll come to shortly. So just moving on to the next slide, in terms of where we sit with the costs on the library community hub pricing. So what we are sitting here today is a budget which is sitting $240,000 over the December estimate, which is a very, very small uplift from where we were in December. Included in that is savings that we've identified of 1.5 million. So from the initial costs that came in July, the team at Willis Bond and amongst the designers have identified achievable savings, which are attached as a schedule in this report, which are listed there, which total just over $1.5 million. So we're very, very happy with where the pricing has landed on this. As I said, it includes real market pricing on the wooden aspects of this building. And really, these variances don't really do justice to the lot of work that's gone into this building. What we've been able to do is inform costs based on the 90 Devonport experience, which is, as you'll be aware, is the council office building that Willis Bond is developing, which is a wooden structure there. And so, for instance, there's $800,000 of additional cost factored into these cost updates as a basis of our learnings from the consenting process at 90 Devonport. So those are costs that didn't exist in our December update, which has been absorbed into these costings. We're very, very confident that we'll find the further $240,000, which would be needed to bring this facility in exactly on the 91.5 million that council approved in its December update. Of also significance, and what we've been able to do through this process is preserve our contingency and escalation allowances. We have avoided dipping into these to try and make the budget balance to the dollar, because we think it's very, very important in terms of risk management and protecting council at this stage before we let construction contracts, that we preserve to the greatest degree we can the embedded contingencies and escalations that our QS has recommended we hold. So the combined contingency and escalation on this package of work is circa $13 million, which is 14% of the estimated December budget of $91.5 million. So as a business that is involved in delivering complex major projects like this, we're very, very comfortable that sitting here where we are today in this design stage, that we've still got 14% of our cost is essentially contingency to be allocated to unknown events when we let pricing. Moving through to exhibition museum. Again, a lot of design work has taken place since December. This is at a less advanced stage than the community hub library building. We're between 50 and 60% of the way through developed design. And the work that's taken place since December has been focused around the facade, and the facade has developed in quite a considerable way in terms of what the component parts are and how it sits around the building, and that is still a work in progress. It's fair to say at this point in time, we're working through a number of aspects around the facade, particularly in regards to the cost that is inherent in that facade. We've also had a lot of work on how the building will operate internally. The ground floor experience for customers has been completely redesigned in terms of the cafe experience, the merchandise and shopping experience, and the entranceways and through to Hamilton Street as well, and from the landscaped area of Te Manawa-Taki or Te Papa itself. So a lot of work. The evolution of this work has meant that steel has been introduced at the ground level because of the height of the void and the length of the structure that was being supported. We have reverted to a hybrid wooden steel structure for this building. The consequence of purely having wood here would have been numerous columns throughout the museum floor, which would have been a highly detrimental outcome for the visitor experience and for the staff laying out exhibitions and artefacts in the museum. So it's now a hybrid wood and steel structure, which is quite a significant design evolution. In terms of, there's been a new manager for the museum that's come on board, and we've reflected a lot of his initiatives in terms of especially how the exhibition space will work. And we're now highly confident that is what we would describe as suitable for international grade exhibitions to come into the space based on his feedback. Moving on to the Civic Whare, a lot of work has been, design work is focused on the back of house experience in terms of separating the public from the councillors and their own amenities, and also focusing on how the various formats of this building will operate at a practical level. This is arguably the most flexible building in the precinct and works in a number of different modes. So a lot of work has been done on that. Moving on to the costs for CWEM. We're sitting with an estimated cost which is 2.7 million above our December estimate, or just over 2% of our original budget. This is the package which has the largest variance to our December 22 estimate, but we're very cognizant that the 2.7 million of savings, we're highly confident that those savings will be achieved through the balance of the developed design and detailed design process. Just to give you a sense of context, we think this is an outstanding outcome from where we were in December, given where we are in the design. In a comparable Willis-Bond project, we would typically see a variation of circa 5% on a project of this scale, building of this scale at this stage in its design life. So we're extremely comfortable with where we sit at the moment. I know that the budgeted number approved by the commissioners in December is a hard number, and we're very confident that we will achieve these savings. We've achieved 800,000 of savings already, but given we only had this report probably 2 weeks prior to delivering it to council, the savings that we've achieved to date represent only 2 weeks' effort on the design team and Willis-Bond team to achieve savings. So there is a lot of time to go, a lot of water to go under the bridge in terms of the design of this building. And this building is the building which will be completed last in the project. So it attracts the greatest escalation. And so looking at our contingency and escalation where we're sitting on this project, it's 19.4% of our December 22 estimate for these buildings. So that again is a very, very healthy contingency and escalation provision. And look, the escalation alone is an educated guess by educated people on what inflation will be between now and when this building is completed in 2028. And that is, to be honest, is guesswork in the extreme. Where I was in December 22, when you asked me how I felt about our escalation provisions, I was a bit nervous about the rampant inflation that we saw around the world. And I thought, it is a fair estimate, but, I saw equal upside and downside risk in terms of where that escalation provision is. Without wanting to bank any savings here today, I'm much more comfortable now that there is more downside than upside risk in terms of the escalation allowance and all of these numbers, and in particular in this package of work, which is the most far dated and therefore attracts the greatest escalation provision. So we are seeing signals around the world and in New Zealand that inflation has peaked and is trending down. So I think the debate is about how quickly it trends down. So I'm optimistic, as I said, more extremely optimistic, that the 2.7 savings will be achieved in a number of areas, and that'll be assuming council approves going to the next stage. That will be our challenge, immediate challenge on the balance of the develop design process. We'll see when. I've taken a lot of time, so I'll whiz through the balance, not because they're less important, but the scale of the numbers is less. The landscaping work has evolved dramatically, and that is focused around a lot of safety and security issues for the public in and around the landscape, and a lot of refinement in terms of ramping and street furniture that sits within the landscaped area. That design process we're very happy with is coming forward well. It's sitting at 50% developed design as well. And if we move to the costings, you'll see that we are right on our December estimate as we sit here today, with 300,000 of already identified savings, bringing that number on budget, within 50,000 of that budget. Of note here is we're sitting on total escalation and contingencies for landscape of 27% of that December estimate. And the reason why that's so high is when you come out of the ground, that is one of the major risk areas in any major project. And landscape, by its very definition, is 100% out of the ground. So the provision there is healthy, it's warranted, because this ground is known to be of poor quality. But we certainly have generous contingencies there, which I think will be more than adequate. Moving on to Masonic Park. As I said before, this is at the most advanced stage of design. It's currently out for tendered pricing right here, right now. So that's in the market, getting construction pricing. So we will have very shortly a hard number as a result of that. Where we sit today at the end of the detailed design process, we have an estimated budget on the next page, which is 280,000 below our estimate in December, which again, hark back, this is the most advanced package within our design process, and we've been able to come in under our December budget. So while it's a relatively modest in dollar terms, it's indicative, I think, of the process that we're going through as a team, and the outcomes that you could expect at similar stages of the other packages' life. Moving on to how the package projects have been defined, and we're really excited about getting into the nitty-gritty of how this project is going to be built. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. What we have identified with our building partner, LT McGuinness, is logical construction packages and how the project will be built how they will physically set up on site, where the cranes will be located, how they will safely access the site and load materials and unload materials, and where their worker accommodation will be. This is daytime accommodation, not nighttime accommodation. So the first package is Masonic Park. That's due to commence construction in October this year. As I said, it's out for pricing at the moment, followed by the Library Community Hub package. Now, by necessity, we've had to allocate landscape to the various building packages, because when Library Community Hub is built, of necessity, public need to access it safely, so landscape has to be attached to it. So a large part of the work that's been undertaken with Little McGuinness is how to logically break up our landscape so it sits within building packages. About 25% of the landscape has been attributed to the Library Community Hub building and half of Willow Street. The third package is CWM, and it includes the balance of the landscape and Willow Street. And the fifth package is Bay Court, or fourth is Art Gallery and Bay Court, which really sort of sit adjacent to and can be slotted in. The Art Gallery works will be done in conjunction with Masonic Park, of necessity, because they border each other. Moving on to the next slide. The program work, and I've kind of touched on a lot of this already. What's particularly exciting is that over the next 12 months, we will have Masonic Park well underway and complete within 12 months. We will have enabling works commencing on Library Community Hub before the end of this calendar year, with construction commencing in earnest in February of next year. And CWM, we will commence enabling works on that site in March next year. So come March next year, the entire Te Manawa-Take o Te Papa precinct will be hoarded. It will be a construction site in totality. There'll be activity on all parts of the site, and it'll be a pretty exciting place to be and to observe this vision, this master plan coming to life. Moving on to the cost analysis here, I don't intend to go through this in any more detail. The detail is in the report. Happy to answer questions. But as I alluded to, we're very happy with the overall levels of contingency and escalation provision that have been provided for in these numbers. And overall, to be just a fraction over 1% from where we were in December, given the amount of additional detail that's now in our drawings, I think is an outstanding achievement, and one that council can be rightly excited about. Finally, just in terms of risks, and I think I've covered a lot of these things already, so a lot of this might feel a bit like repeating, but just a couple of things just to emphasise without exhaustively going through this list, and happy to take questions. I mean, one of our learnings from 90 Devonport is that the area of wooden buildings within New Zealand is a rapidly evolving consenting space, and there is no national standard. So we're fortunate in Te Manawa-Take that we're able to bring a lot of the learnings from 90 Devonport, but this process is not easy. It's not straightforward. It's difficult for the consenting officers because there's very little precedent, and our program envisages a normal consenting path here. So there is a challenge for all concerned to sit down and see how we can smooth that consenting path. The other point I'd like to bring to your attention is what we've got client approvals here. And so as we go through this process where we identify value engineering opportunities and savings within the design, our role as Willis Bond is to cost those, to explain the implications and present them to council officers for their approval. So there will be a need for numerous approvals from pre-purchasing and pre-committing of key structural elements in the build through to approving necessary value engineering ideas that come to the table. So the prompt turnaround of those will impact on program, and there's a lot of moving parts in this, and it needs to be a well-oiled machine, and it has been to date, but I think the pressure is on all of us to continue to work together closely and to commit to the project program that we've seen in front of us. The other one I'd just like to bring to your attention to is the subcontractor capacity. And that is at the front and centre of our builders' mind at the moment. Certainly in 2026, by current estimates, there is going to be a lot of significant construction going on within the CBD of Tauranga. And our program has been designed to accommodate a seamless transition of trades through the site. We believe that this program, as it's presented, is readily achievable based on the capacity we've been able to identify. But we can't control what happens outside the borders of our site and the competition for trades and skills from other sites. So the best thing that we can do to retain skilled people within Te Manawa Take Te Papa is to provide them this pipeline, to give them certainty of work, to provide them with a great work experience, and to feel part of what we firmly believe at Willis Bond is a city-shaping transitional project that we can all be rightly proud of when it's delivered in 6 years' time. So that's probably my lot. I think that's my speaking allocation, but happy to take any questions. Thank you for the time to speak to you.
Thanks very much, Wayne. Now I understand you've got a fly through. Is that you're going to take that now? Or are we going to take questions?
I think we go questions.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So look, thank you, Wayne. I want to take this opportunity really to start with to congratulate the team for the work that you've done to date. To come in at this stage with a 1.15% increase in costs, I think you're right. We should be excited about that because that is an excellent result. And I know it's not just your team. The staff here at TCC have also worked pretty hard, and I think the scope has not crept, and that's an important part of the process, is to make sure that we're not, because I see one of your risks is scope creep, and I know from experience when you ask people what they want, they tell you, and it gets bigger and bigger and brighter. It's good to see that everyone's kept really focused, and I'm pleased to hear your optimism that we can keep close, if not reach that call that we made, that this is how much it's going to cost. Because I think that's quite important when we talk to people in the community. There is a degree of cynicism that it is going to end up costing more and more and more. So it was really important today that you came in with not a huge increase in cost. 1.15% from preliminary design to detailed design is a pretty darn good result, and shows that everyone's heads are in the right place. So that's a significant first step, and your optimism around some of that value engineering to keep within that envelope, I think, is really, really important as we keep faith with our ratepayers. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I've got a number, but I'll give my colleagues the opportunity first. Shad.
Thanks, Wayne. Gareth, Mike, thank you for the update today. I was just thinking about all of the various packages of work and what's been presented today. I suppose my question to you is, in terms of all of the value engineering across each of those various elements, how confident are we in getting those costs hopefully down to budget?
I should also just say I'm sitting with Ryan McCain, who's been leading the team at Willis Bond on this, and so he may well have something to add to this. But I'm extremely confident, and I don't say that glibly at this moment, because what listeners need to understand is that we do this 24/7, all day, every day. Every project that we have ever delivered has gone through these cycles of elation and despair as we've wrestled with costs and tackled designers and looked harder. So I speak from experience that I don't want to dismiss nearly $3 million, but in the scheme of where we are right here, right now, that is, you could easily see that being saved potentially in our escalation assessment. But we will identify specific opportunities as the design progresses, particularly in CWEM, which is at an earlier stage of design. There will be numerous opportunities for us to interrogate the designers, interrogate costs, and we will come up with a package of options. At the end of the day, council will need to sign off on them, so it'll be for Mike and his team to clear those. But it's our job to come up with solutions, and Mike and his team to approve them. Rowan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just as far as certainty to what we tabled in the report. As Wayne said earlier, we had a few weeks with that cost report, and we tabled what we believe, with numbers wise, as definitely what's achievable. That's been isolated and targeted. Is there more money in the building? There is in all packages, and I would just say we tabled further options there, but we held off pricing them and giving certainty to those. So in the body of the report, on each package, there's a long list of VE, and there is more. So no, as far as what we've tabled, we're very confident, and we believe we can achieve the remainder.
Great, thank you. Just another question as well about particularly the CWEM, and you mentioned about the hybrid structure, steel and timber. Does that affect the Green Star rating?
No, it doesn't. It's still achieving the 6-star.
Okay. For me. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Wayne, I'd just have a question around the risks, which are clearly outlined in the document, and you had them on screen. Just putting the funding aside for the moment, because we'll come back to that as part of this meeting, what do you see then as probably the 3 to 4 key risks in terms of the project? Because there are a raft of them. There's probably about 25 to 30 listed there. I just wanted to get a bit more sense in terms of what you see as those 3 or 4 critical ones from your perspective.
Yeah, I think subcontract capacity is probably number one. And it's about, we're about to embark on the largest building program in Tauranga's history. At a time when the industry is really stretched, and there's a lot of examples of failures in the industry nationally. So that I would put that first. Each one beyond that, like say scope creep is one that we've got in there, and that has the potential to be catastrophic, but I think it can be easily managed. It's just about clearly understanding. Council, as we all know, is a multifaceted organisation with numerous stakeholders, and it's a lot more difficult to manage those than, say, a private sector, which might have one or a couple of shareholders, and you do what you're told, sort of thing. You're not in that space, but managing that tightly is vital. But I think to date we've done a really good job with that. Well, Mike and his team have done that, and we kind of see that mostly as council's responsibility. We raise red flags. We'll say, look, there's risks around this, but at the end of the day, that is for council to manage in terms of keeping the various stakeholders on a program and signed off. And yeah, I think consenting is an upfront risk, and I'd like to think that we could, because council is involved in wearing multiple hats here, there has to be a way, I think, to maybe think creatively about just how we can do this better. So, you know, everyone who needs to be having the conversation is in the same building. So I think escalation is less of a risk now because I feel very comfortable with the budgets we've got. So when we say yes, well, these risks are things beyond our control, and I feel very comfortable with the escalation provision that's in the numbers. It's guesswork, and I could be wrong. You know, geopolitical politics being what they are, who knows what the future holds? But right here, right now, I'm more comfortable about that. Obviously, the election coming up in a period of time, you know, it has the potential to cause some confusion if it's not managed correctly. And we are a creature of the governance that sits above us. So, you know, we've got very strong governance at the moment, and hopefully that will continue. And with the CCO, they early days yet, but it looks to have, they're very competent people with a very clear mandate. So that all looks good at the moment. So this is just an unknown in the future. Bill, is that sort of what you were?
Yep, no, yes. I was just wanting to get that sense of those key ones. So thanks for that, Wayne. My second question, in terms of, and I'm on page 37 of the actual document, not the agenda number, which has the heading cost notes and the cost overview, and it outlines those opportunities for further value engineering potential. And there are a few things there that, to my mind, I would hate to see them value engineered out. So it's just understanding what that process would look like. For example, removing the canopy from the Bay Court laneway, the extent of rain gardens reduced, reduction of the arbour. They're just sort of three examples that just come to my mind that might actually take away from the overall project or precinct.
Yeah, that process is pretty clear in our minds, Bill. What we would hope to deliver is a list of potential savings which are greater than the savings that need to be made. And so that council would prioritise those things which it thinks are acceptable and those which are unacceptable. Okay. So it'll be an iterative process.
Okay. No, thank you for that.
Thanks very much, Wayne. You touched on sort of thinking about the project as an integrated whole, and I wonder if you could just outline a little bit more of the potential benefits or the benefits that are encapsulated in integrating this as a staged but single project, rather than kind of iterative approvals and decision making along the way. Because, and I'm just conscious that, you know, we heard a former councillor earlier in the opening address saying that, you know, if he were elected and others of a like mind might start undoing this. And what would be the implications of that kind of, I guess, change of direction in terms of delivery of the outcome? Sure.
Well, I think there's two aspects to that answer, Stephen. One is the buildings are designed to go, are complementary to each other. So the exhibition space complements the museum. It also complements the art gallery. It could also be used by the community hub library building to present historic written works in Tauranga. There are numerous community spaces within the buildings which have been able to be more efficiently placed within the buildings because it's an integrated master plan. The eyesite's a good example, which was originally earmarked for the ground floor of the museum building, now sits adjacent to the library building. So in a master planning sense, the ability to move the component parts has been invaluable to create a sort of a seamless, better experience for visitors. But so that's one aspect of what would be lost in breaking it up. But the second one is probably more significant, and that is, as I said, the ability to have an integrated construction program where you can work through the site, where you have trades on site who are learning to work together. The designers can have working together as well. So to have a team work progressively through the precinct is enormously valuable in terms of de-risking the project and cost savings. Now, we don't know what it would cost to separately build the museum, say in 10 years' time, but to come back to this site and re-establish on this site and build it from scratch at that point in time would be enormously more expensive in today dollars than the program that we have envisaged here. I mean, you just have to look at the piecemeal way that infrastructure has been delivered throughout Auckland, and I'm thinking about transport here, where things were part completed and then retrofitted later at enormous cost. I think, the opportunity here, we have a team that's committed to it. We have an integrated design. I think the benefits of doing this as an integrated package are enormous.
Thanks, Wayne.
So thank you, Wayne. I've just got a couple of minor questions. I note that you have redesigned the shade structure over the stage in the amphitheatre. I'm just mindful of the performers that came and talked to us during the consultative process about ensuring that there was sufficient shade for performers. In your redesign of it to get it more, I think you said sculptural, are we still providing enough shade so that if you have, for instance, a band playing there, is it sufficiently enough, sufficiently shade-proof?
I'll let Rowan
It's going
answer.
to be.
I will take it as note. It is still very much a work in progress. As of a few weeks ago, options were tabled on the form and function of that shade structure. So that I understand that's being all taken on board, that feedback, but not finalised design just yet.
Okay, I mean, I understand the desire to have it sculptural, but it has to be functional for people to perform. Yep. My second one is around the archaeological site in Masonic Park, and I think that provides our opportunity, and I know we've had discussions, but it does provide the opportunity to tell the more colonial story, the more recent history of the development of Tauranga, and I think that's going to be quite important. The mana whenua link is very strong through the whole precinct, but we also need to be recognising the original, it probably wasn't the original port area, which was more over the Dive Crescent area, but certainly that harbour entrance down there and the start of more maritime. So that's just to note. I think you've probably answered my question, because in all of this I was looking to see, so we're building the library first, so when will the library be able to open and people use it? You're not anticipating that they would have to wait until 2028, and I think when you went through the packages, so do I take it from that number 2 in your package with some of the landscaping, will it then enable the library to be open and to be used? Is that correct? Absolutely.
So our main works, so hand over to TCC for their soft fit out. They're scheduled for January 26.
Right. Okay.
So,
thank you.
There'll be an inevitable kind of commissioning period. I mean, Mike would be better to answer that part of it, when it would actually open.
Any idea, Mike?
Yeah, there'll be approximately a 3-month commissioning period. So we're sort of thinking The second quarter of 2026.
Whoops. Yep. Okay. All right. So any more questions for Wayne? No? Gareth?
While we're on Library Community Hub, if technology plays ball, we do actually have an early version of a fly-through of that building that we could hopefully play.
That would be very helpful.
Yep, so fingers crossed. There is actually a soundtrack, but obviously technology didn't work 100%. I didn't want to sing, so.
Anything else on that report? So thank you very much, Wayne. So I think before we do anything more with that report, we're now going to ask our board, Te Manawataki o Te Papa Limited Board, to come and give us their report. And we're absolutely thrilled to have Kim with us today. Kim, as chair of that board, we have nationally significant directors who have been involved in large-scale complex buildings, construction, and we're very grateful that they're as excited about this project and have agreed to take on the oversight of construction. So welcome. And we have your report in front of us, if you would like to speak to it.
Thank you, Morena. Yes, I'm Kim Wallace. I'm chair of the Te Manawataki o Te Papa Limited Board, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present to Council today the views of the board on the matters contained within these reports that you have in front of you. So we'll step through a number of the reports, but firstly, delighted to be here and delighted to be part of the board. There's 4 independent directors that have been appointed to the board, which is myself as chair, Barry Bragg, Peter Nevin and Nathan Spear. We all share Council's ambition for the development of a vibrant new Tauranga city hub. I also grew up here and see it today, and I also have memories of an amazing city centre. So very excited to be sitting as a board member helping to govern these projects along as well. We bring a diverse set of skills and significant experience, as you've noted, Anne, in the delivery of large capital projects, pleasingly on time, within budget, and to stakeholder expectations. We've met monthly since April 2023, receiving status updates and independent advice, including that of Willis Bond and also other advisors, in regards to the design and the construction of these buildings. As outlined in the papers and actually as spoken to already this morning, there's a number of significant risks that it would be remiss of me to sit here and not talk about today. But these are expected in a program of this size and scale. Inherent in the program are key cost, time and scope challenges, which the board are closely monitoring and managing. As the entity responsible for governing the delivery of Te Manawa o Te Papa projects, we are firmly committed and actively engaged in setting up successful strategies and relationships, including with mana whenua. We want to sit beside you and with you, achieving the goals as set out in the letter of intent. So the letter of expectation that we have just received from Council for 2023-2024, and also the 2023-2026 statement of intent. It's very clear to us what is required here. So we've just heard from Willis Bond about the design and cost update report. I do want to just call out a couple of things. So we received this report and we met on the 19th of July. As such, this is the content of my paper today, is the deliberations from the board. As you've heard, the cost estimates continue to be refined as the design phases progressed. And with that, we're getting additional confidence in the robustness of these cost estimates. The total cost estimate, including escalation and contingency, as has already been spoken about, has increased from 303.4 million in the December 2022 long-term plan amendment to what is today 306.3 million. Those cost estimates include project contingencies of approximately 10% and an average escalation costs of 7.5%. And you've heard from Wayne how they are split down into the different projects. And you would have seen that some that are longer in the program have got higher cost escalations and due to that. The board intends to retain and preserve sufficient contingencies through the lifetime of the project. We think this is absolutely critical, and certainly in my experience with the large projects that I've managed, absolutely critical that we retain those through the life of the project, and they have to be sufficient. I'm delighted that Willis Bond have given you the same update that they did with us in regards to those value engineering opportunities. Wayne knows I will be holding his feet to the fire in delivering of those. But again, we can understand why, from the information that they have provided to us, that those value engineering opportunities appear to us real. I think there's been some good questioning today about what does that mean in regards to the functionality of the spaces. We're also mindful of that. In the current economic climate and benchmarked with other similar projects, we agree that the cost estimate increase of 1.15% from December is considered minimal. However, we are very cognizant that Council publicly consulted on a total project cost of 303.4 million. We believe strongly any overspend is very likely to be detrimental to strengthening community perceptions of trust and confidence. As such, the board have instructed the Council project team to continue actively pursuing all opportunities through the ensuing design phases to reduce those cost estimates further, with a view to delivering this program within the budget that you have set to us and put as our mandate as your board. So moving to the next report that you have, I'll just talk to the rest of them. So the business case is the next report that you will be discussing. We received that, reviewed that, and we provided feedback on it. Of particular note, and I just want to place further emphasis on what has already been stated today, the delivery program is based on that fundamental premise that it is a single staged construction program of projects. We've heard about the interdependencies and the cost efficiencies in doing so. If a decision was made in the future to revise that approach, I think that would need to be undertaken with a high degree of cognition about the incremental costs that are very likely to be incurred due to that. So we sat in deliberation on that and talked about that, and we felt that that was really important that we call out today. The capital project costs include proposed fit-out costs, which are also undergoing ongoing review. Again, we are asking that any changes to any costs are managed through the approval processes and the gateways for this project and are retained as much as can be practically possible within the budget. I'm going to move to the financial strategy next. So again, we've received the financial strategy. This is something that we have been particularly interested in as an incoming board. We want to know that there is going to be money to be able to pay for this from external funding, as well as what's going to be paid by ratepayers. The early procurement of key structural elements, we've talked about timber and structure and also steel for the library and community hub. This is just flagging that this does present an opportunity for the board to manage cost escalation, and we are recommending council locking in supply in the near term at current pricing. We have received some timber supply options, and these will be presented to us formally in due course for consideration at a future board meeting once council approves the business case. But it will enable locking in pricing at today's rates. Detailed cash flow forecasts are still in progress. As mentioned, they'll subsequently provide the board with the opportunity to test and seek assurance that the ratepayer funded versus the external funded assumptions and parameters, whether that be timing and value of the drawdown of those funds, will be achieved and are practically robust and have appropriate plans to underpin those. So we're particularly interested in those cash flows. We don't have them at the moment. They're due, I believe, in another couple of months, September, October. We're cognizant of the critical necessity for the ongoing council support of this funding strategy to ensure delivery of this full single-staged program, which will in turn realise the full community outcomes intended from this significant investment. There'll be a further paper received today and discussed, which is the asset realisation reserve. Again, your board received that and discussed that last week. Funding the program remains a critical risk. However, we have gained further confidence from the information that was presented to us by that proposed asset realisation reserve. We want to note in particular the independent review that was undertaken by KPMG, which, whilst generally supportive of the methodology and sensitivities that have been applied, makes several recommendations and highlights material issues regarding the saleability and the pricing of certain properties. And as detailed in that financial strategy, the board supports council's commitment to fund the program of works by maximising the external funding sources including grants and development contributions before utilising funds generated through the airport activity and the asset realisation reserve. But we know that it is a matrix, a building blocks of ratepayer funds, but also this external funding, and we know that the asset realisation reserve appears to us an absolute necessity. To the next report that you will be receiving is the Willis Bond Development Management Agreement. We've met for 3 meetings, and this item has been on all 3 meetings that the board has considered. We've met with Willis Bond and also independent advisors on this. An independent benchmarking exercise was done on the Willis Bond fee, and this has provided confidence to the board that the cost presented value for money for council. It's in our opinion that the proposed fee structure was also considered to be reflective of the risk in the project complexities. In appointing Willis Bond, the board expects there will be additional benefit from an active application of learnings from council's 90 Devonport Road project, which you would have heard Wayne talk to already, and other recent similar scale and complexity projects. Additionally, the expertise demonstrated by Willis Bond promotes an effective pathway to managing and resolving key project risks, such as construction complexities, and we want to call out again the consenting risk. We strongly believe that Te Manamataki o Te Papa presents a significant step change opportunity for council to look at ways to deliver consenting support more efficiently and effectively. And just briefly, there is an updated master plan report that you have in front of you today as well for consideration. We also received this. We've asked that this be rescheduled, a workshop is scheduled for next month to look more into the detailed cost review. This has only been recently added to the scope of our governance of the Te Manamataki o Te Papa board. And we believe that it merits more of an in-depth review, which we will do next month. So we have no other comments on really the waterfront update at this point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. That's very comprehensive and reassuring and for most of it. Any questions for Kim? Stephen.
Thank you, Kim. And can I say it's great to have the level of expertise in major project delivery that you and your colleagues on the board are bringing to this exercise. It was critical from the Commission's point of view that we had independent oversight of the delivery of the project to reassure members of the community that we have good governance in place, particularly given the size and scale of this project and the significance to the city. I just want to probe a little bit more into your level of satisfaction as a board into the adequacy of the risk and cost escalation reserves. And your report does comment that you are satisfied with them, but do you think they are sufficiently robust given the change that we've experienced? And also, if you can comment on the value for money aspects of the Willis Bond Development Agreement, because there have been questions raised in the community as to the adequacy of that and whether or not we're getting sufficient tension in the development program. So if you're able to perhaps enlarge on those 2 aspects.
Thank you. Firstly, so the risk and so the contingencies and the cost escalations, yes, we believe that given the phase that design is at per each building, the numbers that are in there, which were the 10% of the contingencies and on average 7.5% of cost escalation, we believe should be adequate. There's nothing that we have heard from our independent advisors that have met with us or from our experience that would suggest to us that that is not going to be adequate. However, what we do have is a number of value engineering opportunities that you would have seen. So there are a number that are being actively progressed as we speak to ensure that we look at that 1.15% overrun and look to achieve a number that's 303.4 million. So we are committed to achieving that. There's another set of value engineering opportunities that you've seen in the report that we want to look at prioritising with council, because this is controlled by council. We don't have the mandate to change that scope as your board, but we can make recommendations, and we want to look at that list and say, well, how might they be prioritised to make sure that we, if the case happens that we have another large event that is unforeseen or not anticipated, that we can address that through looking at more value engineering. Within the actual cost estimates, there's also a quantitative risk assessment that is done that makes up the numbers that underpin the cost per building. So, for example, in regards to the construction program that Wayne talked about, there'll be a number of different delays and risks that they've taken into account as the contractor that'll inform those base numbers. On top of that is then the contingencies and the cost escalation. So we've talked about that last Wednesday with them as well, to get some confidence that they've done a proper QRA as well. Now, there's also costing reviews that have been done by independent advisors to give us some more certainty that there's those independent reviews being done on them. So that's the adequacy of the risk and the cost escalation and the process and the approach that's been adopted. So secondly, the value for money. So this is public money. This is something that's dear to our hearts, as where all of us are sitting around, and a number of us, whether it's Barry, Peter, Nathan and I, we're very, very cognizant that this is public money. So we are looking for evidence and for the advisors to provide us with demonstrations of the tension being there, commercial tension being there, that through procurement that there will be a process where things are going out to tender, that the fee benchmarking that I just spoke to, we've asked for that to be reviewed, and as I say, that is the report that has come back to us has advised us that that is definitely in the realm of what we would be expecting for a program of this scale and complexity.
Any other questions for Kim? No? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I need a mover and seconder to receive the report from Te Manawa o Te Papa Limited. Stephen and Bill. So I think we do that first. All those, any discussion? I think it's very helpful to have that level of expertise giving us the advice. It underpins our decision making in more ways than one. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So then we go back to the design and cost update report and the resolutions on that, which is page 27 in the agenda. And we need to receive the report and then the list of cost estimates. So we are moving, I need a mover and a seconder then from A to G, because we can't move H or I until later on. So Shad, are you moving A to G, which is receiving the design and cost update report, then the library, community hub, civic whare, Masonic Park, civic precinct, transferring unspent civic heart demolition of $1 million into Te Manawataki o Te Papa, and requiring that overall cost estimate will continue to be refined. You're happy to move that, and Bill's seconding that. So everyone's clear, we're moving A to G of the design and cost update report. Any further discussion on that? No? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right. So that brings us then to the business case. Can I just check what time lunch is? 12:30, okay. So we're now on item 11.3. For those of people who are online trying to follow us, we're on page 73, and we have the business case, which was a separate attachment to the agenda. Christine.
Good afternoon, it is. So I'd want to speak to the business case report. I'd like to introduce Edward Guy. So Edward is the Managing Director of Rationale Consulting. He's a qualified Better Business Case practitioner and a business case investment logic map facilitator, so very experienced in the field of doing business cases. Also like to acknowledge Sarah Stewart. So Sarah, sitting down the back there, she was the TCC lead for the development of the business case. So as a council, you directed that a business case be prepared and that you wanted it presented back for consideration prior to you make any final decisions with respect to the project proceeding and starting moving to entering into any contracts. So this business case report is in effect that key gateway in the decision-making process. There's been a little bit of talk this morning about cost estimates and approved fund budgets and variations in different costs. So just wanted to perhaps go through and explain. The business case was started some time ago when there were earlier estimates of costs. That's why when you look at this report, throughout it refers to 309.8 million. As it's been discussed this morning, the design and cost updates have been happening all the way through, and that continues to move as it's refined and as value engineering occurs. And currently that's sitting at estimated cost of 308.2. So there's about a $1.6 million difference between that and the business case. We've looked at that, and in our view that's not significant from the business case perspective, and it doesn't change the underlying the conclusions that have been reached. And also noting that the approved budget, which will come through this report and also the subsequent reports to follow, is the 306.3 million, and that's approved by way of council resolution. So we've sort of really got three figures, that which is the business case, which was the value when we started working on this business case, and we have not changed it, we've kept it, otherwise it's really hard to make everything fit together because things move. The continued work that Wallace Bond has been doing, and then the decisions that you as a council have made as to what budgets that you're approving. So we refer to sort of three different amounts. There's not a huge variation between them given the sort of scale of 300 million, but they are different numbers. We have also tabled a new figure, figure 40 from page 131 of the business case, and it's just been a change into that page. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Edward, who will move through a presentation.
Kia ora koutou. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the people I've worked with putting this together, particularly Christine and Jeremy Borse, and of course Sarah. Sarah has done the heavy lifting on this work, and she's done an exceptional job in my opinion. It's a real privilege to be here today as well, having been here in 2015, 2016, working with Christine, looking at some deceased buildings that we did some analysis over and observed that they were really not fit for purpose and not worth keeping at that stage. So it's a real privilege to see the evolution of this project to the point where it is now and the decision that's before you guys to make. So thank you. It's great to be here. If we can move to the first page. I'd also like to thank the whole team at Tauranga City Council, because we've engaged with so many people and it's been really fantastic to get the help that we've needed to pull this together. The premise is that we are here using the business case environment to reconfirm Te Manawataki o Te Papa. We're using the better business case methodology. Look, it's a methodology that enables investments of a public nature to be understood really well. You know, these are not just purely economic investments. These are investments that come down to public benefit. And we will take you through that journey and demonstrate that this is not all about economics. This is about public benefit. So with the better business case environment, we're able to test a raft of different options and determine their value. And there's a really strong process there that we've followed. Next slide, please. As I was mentioning, this is contained in the business case, but this starts back with the admin building on Willow Street being identified as having black mould. And then we actually did analysis of all the other buildings, and our analysis identified that the buildings were not worth keeping at the time. And since then, the journey's here. There's been more work on business cases, more work on master plans, and here we are today at quite a fundamental moment in time. Next slide, please. In this recent engagement, in the time that I've been involved, this is the last 6 months, we have gone through these critical stages. We've gone back and had a look at all the information that's been around. We've done a validation and gathered up the evidence. In the time frame I've been, since my absence, there's been a lot of information, and so we had to actually embrace all that information, bring it all together. We've refreshed the investment logic map, which I'll take you through. We then started doing multi-criteria analysis. I know these are all big words, but this is what it's all about, right? This is where we can actually see a decision, we can see the evidence, we can see it transparently why we've actually got to the point we've got to. So we've identified the preferred option. I'll take you through some of the mechanics of that. So that's MCA1. We also filled in some gaps. Sorry, I've gone around the wrong way here, but we've actually looked at the service delivery. What will the buildings actually be used for? What will the visitation? So in our work, we've done a lot about forecast demand. And I think that's a really important part for the city to understand that this, our expectations is that this will bring a lot more people to the city centre. And also we've actually analysed the benefits so people can understand there's a multitude of benefits here. It's not one thing that we're actually investing in, it's a multitude of benefits. So I'll show you that as well. We've also done some wider testing through MCA2. This is really early days. There's a very basic table in the business case. There's further work to do on that wider testing. This is around Site B and the stadium. Next slide, please. So these are the core investment objectives. These are the really high level things that we're trying to achieve. People will look to this 2 million visits per annum in 2035, and this should be our objectives. This should be what everybody is targeting on achieving. And by actually putting out these goals, we can actually track those, monitor those, and understand if we're not achieving that and what can we do that's different. The next one, number 2, is about the economic benefits. Some of this is GDP, some of it's wider economic benefits. So look, there's a bit of depth to that. And then the last one is about inclusiveness and attracting 300,000 visitors to the museum and 800,000 people annually to the community hub. And our residents, if you look in the benefits map we've got, our residents at the moment don't have a high promotional score. We're trying to look at a promotional score of 60. Where I live in the South Island, we're up in the 80s. We actually test that because it's a fundamental part of our economy. So at the moment, you're about 35. So there's some real room here, and investments like this, with all the other investments that you're proposing, will really help build that promoter score. Next slide, please. So this is the investment logic map. Obviously, this is in the work that you've got. I can't actually read that, so I've got a copy here. But it's really about poor amenity. All of these, explaining this is about problems, the benefits that we should see if we overcome these problems and how we would measure them. So this is a really important part of the better business case process. This is about really defining the problem really clearly so that everyone can understand it. So the first problem is around the amenity of the site and the surrounding area, and how that will really challenge to attract locals, visitors, and businesses to the area. The next one's around failing to meet our arts, culture, and heritage, and manaakitanga. Where's our hospitality? How are we actually treating visitors? So again, it's about people and creating opportunities to actually to deliver to that. And the last one was a new one. In the previous ILM, we talked about workplace, because at that stage, the office was going to be built on the site. Today, we're now bringing in a new one, which is around inclusiveness and about us understanding who we are and actually sending some signals about what Tauranga represents. And if we actually embrace that, then we believe we will improve the inclusiveness of the city. Next slide, please. So this is called a multi-criteria analysis. So in this process, the process is about guiding us to understand which option delivers the most value. Now, it's in the report. I'm not going to go through the detail, but we've actually put some benchmarks here together about the right-hand side is about full public realm. That's about not doing anything on the site. And the other side is around making the highest and best use, which could be selling it, which is basically impossible, possibly. I'm not saying that, but you can see on the right-hand side, it's very lowly scored. And then there's some options in between, and we've evaluated those based on the investment objectives from the investment logic map, the cost, the risks, and some other business needs. And the option of an integrated Te Manawa-Taki Oti Papa, oh, I'm getting pushed along here, that's good. I'll move on. No, so it's important, the MCA is the environment where you will actually see where value is delivered. Yep. So our assessment criteria have gone through that. There's a bit more to the background, but that is the place where we can actually see the option that delivers the most value. We also assessed another option which was staged, and that hasn't delivered as many benefits as the preferred option. And also we've actually done other options where we've actually taken components out and they all perform not as well also. Slide, please. So in terms of, we have built a visitation model that underpins all these numbers, and we've done it by each component from Te Manawa-Taki Oti Papa. We've evaluated those, and we've got a couple of examples. As we've said, look, we're looking at 2 million people by 2035 and 2.3 million by 2053. So this is a massive increase from where we are today. You'll see on the slide, we're talking about 1,600 people a day. We're talking about 5,500 by 2035. So this is a massive uplift. And from the work we've done, we actually believe there's a lot of detail in that work, and they are actually conservative in terms of those estimates. And I'll show you why in the next slide. So in the business case itself, there is work on each one of the elements. So we've actually compared these against other examples around the country. You'll see in the bottom of the slide there, we've actually made projections against different cities who have similar facilities. And that's been a good way of actually benchmarking ourselves against it. So we've actually talked about the current state. Hey, what would it look like if we built this individual element, or what does it look like if we build an integrated Te Manawa-Taki Oti Papa? So there's an assessment done for each one of these. Next slide, please. So that's the community hub. And here is the museum visitation. And you can see there, we had plenty to go with there. There's lots of examples around the country. And you can see we've been pretty conservative in terms of our assessment. So we've made these assessments independent of Tauranga City and then confirmed them with the staff to make sure that they're happy with them. Next slide, please. In terms of economics, so GHD have undertaken this analysis. It's a complex world undertaking economic analysis on public assets, but nonetheless important. What we've done here is, well, I haven't done the work, GHD have done the work, but we have come up with a number of scenarios. So in effect, it has been tested in a sensitivity analysis. Agglomeration effects are the effects on productivity of businesses being closer together, working together. We can see from the media today about what is going on in the CBD. I actually was fortunate to see the events on television this morning. And look, this is what we're expecting, like if we can get that agglomeration effect, we get productivity from our businesses. You can see a huge uplift there in terms of tourism, the value of Māori cultural expression. GHD haven't made this up. They have used central government's evaluation techniques to come up with this evaluation. So a very fundamental, important part. We were not talking this way 7-8 years ago. It's great to see it. It's great to see a change, and this is all part of our inclusiveness. So we go to the next page, and this is, sure, we've got 4% and 6% discount rates, and we've got assumed and catalyst. But look, let's just cut to it. Effectively, it's fair to say the benefit cost analysis sits somewhere between 1 and 2. Yep. Let's move on. This is also a really key part, and I apologise for the oversight of this material landing on your desk. This was my error, and I'm just apologising right here and now. The report doesn't have this particular article in it. Look, it's a really fundamental piece of the jigsaw puzzle to understand what you invest in and what you're proposing you will actually benefit and what will be the benefits. So from this picture here, we've identified our core investment objectives. Yep. So they are the improved city centre vibrancy, increased local and regional economy, and enhanced inclusiveness. So that's the second column in. They all tie into your strategic directions. They're another line of all the strategic directions. If you dive into all of those reports, there's a whole lot of outcomes that they're specifying, and we can tie into all of those things. So this project actually delivers across a vast array of your strategic directions. And then we've actually got some measures, and we've got some actual specific things we would like to see that this project delivers. It is fundamental that actually these benefits are monitored. Really stress that, because New Zealand is terrible at it. We really need to monitor these benefits and make sure we are guiding our way towards delivering these. I won't go through them in detail, but they are available. Next slide, please. So funding and financing, there's further papers on this to come, so I won't spend too much time on that. Council has resolved to fund 151 million, which we've heard multiple times this morning already. The IFF, Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, there's an opportunity there for Tauranga City to obtain some financing from this. And then the financial strategy outlines how the remainder of the finance will actually occur. In the business case, we talk about an adaptive funding pathway, which provides opportunities to fund this as it proceeds. That is the extent of what I need to say. Thank you very much.
So look, thank you very much for that. I'm mindful of a challenge that we were given at a consultation meeting when we went out with the long-term plan amendment. And the then chair of the Ratepayers Alliance, which was formed in opposition to the appointment of a commission, challenged us as to how what we were proposing with Te Manawataki o Te Papa would increase the vibrancy of the city. So for me, what you've presented today, based on a pretty structured process that is widely accepted nationally, gives us confidence that what is being proposed around this table today will achieve increased vibrancy of our city. And I think this, you're right, this to me, I mean, I love the logic map and all those bits, but this to me is the key. So I'm pleased you've upgraded it. I'm delighted that there's some targets there. And I'm delighted to hear you say that it should be monitored closely, because from the community's perspective, this actually tells the story. So that combined with the logic map, which tells people how you got to this, to me are the two most important parts of the document. I mean, there will be people that will trawl through the fine print, I have no doubt. And I was going to ask you about how you've got your visits, but you've explained it really well. And I think, you know, people can follow through that this isn't these aren't figures you've plucked out of thin air. These are based on what's happening around the country in order to feed into your conclusions. So thank you very much. It must be of some comfort to you to know that all that work that you've done over the years may well reach a conclusion. We haven't got there yet, but may well reach a conclusion. I think that's probably the one thing you didn't mention, although I just saw a glimpse of it, is increasingly we've heard from people, particularly workers in the city, about that feeling of safety or feeling unsafe. And it came through in here that by enhancing what's happening, the activity in the centre city, you are actually creating a much safer environment, simply because there's a lot more people around, a lot more eyes on what happens. Now, that comes with its risks as well. But I think it is a really key component that is forgotten about. When you have a centre of town with big open spaces, empty shops, and a city CBD that looks like nobody really cares about it, why would anyone care about it? It would be a logical place for some of the malcontents to gather and do a bit of damage, because actually if there's no retail or there's no office, no activity, well, who cares if you break their window or graffiti all over it or whatever. So I think that's a big component for the CBD as well. But look, thank you very much. And those two pieces of paper, I think I will go into my handbag so that I can pull them out at any stage. And I now have an answer for a comprehensive answer to that challenge that was put to us early last year, because this shows quite conclusively that what is being proposed will add to the vibrancy of the centre city and will bring people to the centre city, and we can have confidence about that. So thank you. I'm aware that we are over our 2 hours that standing orders says that we've got to take a break. So I'm suggesting that we deal with the business case and then break. Is everyone happy with that, rather than interrupt the flow at the moment? Okay. Any questions for Edward? Stephen and then Bill.
Chair, and I indicated earlier that I'll be probing a little bit more into the economic business case. And before I do, though, I think it's critical that I stress that actually the economic business case is actually only a part of the reason why we might invest in this project. And you've set out in your wider analysis the more strategic, social and cultural reasons why this has to be the heart of the city going forward. But if I may probe a little bit more, you mentioned a cost benefit ratio of somewhere between 1 and 2. And those are actually pretty positive numbers. But the one that is reported is 1.17. I suspect that's at the conservative end, because when I have a look at the proxy benefits that are on page 83 of your report, and there's a table there that shows some of the basis for GHD's analysis of the economic benefits. And by way of example, they've said the number of additional houses stimulated in Tauranga Central in the inner area under the assumed model, which is the kind of the basis of the 1.17, is a mere 155 houses. I mean, I find that very difficult to credit. And I think the catalyst number, which is 1,400 more houses or homes, seems to me to be much more likely. Similarly, the number of new businesses stimulated in Tauranga Central and inner area at just 97. It seems to me that the catalyst number of 597 seems more probable. And then the increased resident market size increasing by just 317 souls as a result of this investment seems to me to be very conservative, and I tend to favour the 3,000 plus and probably even more. And then the educational benefits are rated about the same under both models. Additional local child visits to the library at 2,800. And I consider that in the light of the other analysis that you've undertaken on library visits and museum visits and that sort of thing, where the modelling has been at the conservative end, and in fact well below actual numbers that are experienced in comparative cities. So my conclusion drawing out of that is that the reported benefits of 1.17, a ratio, are much more likely to be more towards the 2 than the 1. And I'm just wondering whether or not you're able to comment on that. Do you think that's a reasonable interpretation?
I agree with you, Stephen. We've erred on conservatism all the way through this. The projections are conservative. We haven't done the economics report, so GHD have done the work, and they've made their recommendations. So it's a bit hard for me to comment on the economic side of it, but I think you're right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Edward. I just need to make a comment first. I found it fascinating, although it's probably depressing in terms of the Appendix 1 to the business case that talks about the decisions register going back to 2016. And so it's 7 years. And there's decisions made, there's more planning undertaken, there's further reports. So, 7 years later, it certainly is great to be in this meeting today then in terms of what we've done so far at this meeting and then what is elsewhere on the agenda. But the point of making or highlighting that is that back in September 2016, there was the investigations into the civic space options. At that point in time, it was 22.3 million in capital costs for a building, and I think it was about 2.3 in lease costs. So just an example of, in my view, the cost of the delay, the cost of indecision, and it actually comes back to haunt us when we are getting round to actually making those decisions now. And we've already made the decision, for example, in terms of the Civic Administration building, but I just needed to highlight that. And there was a good article in the Herald in the weekend, and fine, it was a political article, but the reference, and I think it was one of your former, was the speaker and former speaker who provided some advice to the current PM, and that the worst decision is not to make a decision. And I think that list of decisions or whatever, or delay over 7 years, for me actually highlights that, and then the significant cost that gets added to because those decisions aren't made, or they're made and not implemented. So I just needed to perhaps highlight that. One question I did have, though, it was around operational expenditure and costs, and there's the figure, I think it was about 26 million, and appreciate what that's made up of, and that's clearly outlined in the tables. Does that figure take account of what the existing operational costs are for some of those activities? Because we already have the Bay Courts and we have the library, etc., etc. So is that seen as additional on top of what exists now, or how much regard has been taken of those operational costs at the present time for those activities?
So I think the best person to answer that would be Malcolm Gibb, who's been involved in the financial space, but also Catherine may wish to speak to existing costs. So, yeah. So this was the 26 million issue, yeah, and what's included in there relative to existing costs. Thanks, Malcolm.
So the $26 million by sort of 2029, 2030, that is in addition to the existing budgets for the library and Bay Court. So yeah, it's on top of.
So, for example, using depreciation, so it's recognising there would be existing depreciation of those existing facilities, and that this is, I'm wondering how it's discounted of what exists compared to what will apply going forward for the new buildings activities.
Yeah, at the moment, what we've basically done is accepted existing depreciation on the existing facilities that we've got, and then particularly for the community hub, that would be the additional depreciation for that new building. So yeah, there's quite a few things there around what we've got now and what we're going to move to that we made some assumptions around. But essentially, the community hub is the additional depreciation.
So then, in terms of, I think it's under the direct costs, which presumably is in terms of those costs to actually operate the facilities within the precinct, but also the precinct collectively, has that same discounting occurred? Because there'll be a cost now in terms of staff and operational costs. So are you saying what's in the business case is totally on top of that operational cost now, in terms, for example, just using staff or other OPEX?
Yes, we've added that on as an additional cost. So, and we've also looked at the concept around if we get that number of visitations coming through, how do we develop our business cases and business development and marketing, and what sort of resource do we need for that? Some of that resource is probably currently sitting somewhere in the council, which we can utilise. But in order to move it to that stage that Edward talked about, we probably need to incur more costs to get it there. So yeah, there's a bit of both going on there, and some additional costs to get that higher level of service that you're looking for in the business case. But it's also recognising that there are areas of expertise which certainly can be utilised on the area.
If I may, supplementary to that, because the basis of the business case is that we've looked at the marginal benefits and we've compared those against the marginal costs. And so in this case, our operating costs are up by $26 million, but the business case demonstrates that there's somewhere between a 1 and 2, and we think closer to 2 benefit cost ratio. And so not only are we covering the capital costs, but we're also covering the additional operating costs. And I think that's an important issue that people need to understand. And I see everyone's nodding, so confirms that I'm correct.
Plus, if you look on page 115, where it actually does the cost analysis, by the time you get to 2028, with it all operating, you've got depreciation of 9.5 and interest of just on 8. So the more buildings you build, capital investment drives operating and drives depreciation in particular. And of course, if you're borrowing the money, it's at interest rates. Had you finished, Bill?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
Sorry.
right.
Yes.
Shared.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the report. And like everybody else, I did find the report a really easy read to work through and try and understand what the costs and what the benefits were. I suppose my question, similar to Stephen, and I did see in the report that in terms of the discount rate, Treasury use 5. And so wanting to understand, I suppose, between 5 and 6, what that looked like if we were to apply a 5. I know that in 6 it was about 0.95, I think. That's just off the top of my head. But yeah, what would a 5% discount rate look like?
So we did have this conversation internally, and we did go back to GHD and ask them, is that something that they could do? And their response was, you're basically going to land between the 4 and the 6%, and it's all still built on assumptions. So you could do a lot of work at a cost to do that work, but it would add you a lot of information other than knowing that it's going to land between those two. So it would be somewhere between, for the assumed, the 1.17 and the 0.95. And for the catalyst between the 1.61 and the 2.83. So we sort of went through the debate, trying to line up with the Treasury advice, and Paul was involved in that, and we landed on it's probably not going to get us much more. Yeah.
I mean, we probably are talking over 1 anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
If you were to apply that discount rate. Okay. Thank you.
I hate to say it, but the criticism of the 4, when you look back at your, it probably accounts for why we're still 8 years down the track.
Yes.
Yep. Still making a decision.
Yeah.
Okay. So nothing more? Nothing more? Okay, so for the business case then, we have 2 recommendations. One, that we receive the report, and 2, that we adopt the business case that recommends proceeding with the delivery of the program of works.
There was another, just 2 minor amendments. One was around the table, benefits table to be incorporated, and the other one was to delegate authority to the Chief Executive in case there's any sort of other minor editorial changes that we do pick up as we move forward.
Okay, so 1, receive the report, B, adopt the business case, C, tables the, is it in my run sheet somewhere, is it? Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. Still doesn't have D, which has the receives the updated
that was added into B.
Oh, right. Okay.
Subject to the replacement, yeah.
Okay, let me read it out. A, receives the report, Te Manawataki or Te Papa business case. B, adopts the business case that recommends proceeding with the delivery of the program of works, subject to the replacement of figure 40 on page 131 is tabled at the meeting. And C, delegates to the Chief Executive the authority to rectify any minor errors or omissions that are identified in the business case prior to publication. I think, I didn't mention it, but I think it talks about 2 directors and we've appointed another one in the meantime. And, you know, so there's a few things like that to tidy up. Okay, so Stephen, you were prepared to move that. And Bill, you were prepared to second that. Okay, any further discussion? Can I just, before we do that, thank all of those that have been involved. Sarah sitting quietly down the back, but I know it's been a huge amount of work and really appreciate the conclusion of it because it is an important step. It was always an important gateway in the process that we identified and everyone has really put their heart into getting it ready for this meeting, so really appreciate that. Okay, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Edward. We are now going to adjourn for lunch. The time is, it's just on 1 o'clock. I think we'll have 1:30. We'll come back at 1:30 and move on to the money. How are we going to pay for it? Okay, meeting's adjourned. Okay, so the meeting is reconvened. Always helps to talk about money on a full stomach, although some people find difficult to keep awake. Right, financial strategy. Paul is still on a bus somewhere, waiting for a flight out of Auckland. So Christine, and you're going to be joined by a few other people. Talk about the financial strategy paper.
Strategy will be me, and Simon will come and join for the asset realisation one.
Okay,
So
let's go.
Okay, so for each of these two following papers, I've got about 5 slides just to cover the key points. I'm not looking to go through it all. I'll take the report as read. So the financial strategy report has interdependence with the asset realisation and design cost report. So it is one of the ones that we suggest that you consider but leave lie on the table, because you really need to work through the other elements before you can form a view as to whether you want to adopt the overall financial strategy. But the paper is written on the assumption that the recommended resolutions and the other reports are approved, because otherwise you sort of can't really make the thing come together. So from writing a report perspective, the LTPA, as the overview report that the Chief Executive spoke to, talks about that net cost to ratepayer for the capital costs of Te Manawa-Taki Otapapa of 151 being funded through the ratepayer mechanism, and the balance being funded by grants, sponsorship, 3 waters reform, better off funding, and the proceeds from sale of assets. So that was what you decided through the LTPA process. And you noted that there was further work to be done on those matters and come back to you, and that is in effect this report. It's the next stage of the further work around the funding package. Since you did adopt the LTPA, though, there have been some changes. One is that the budget has moved and was recommended to be moved from the 303 million to the 306.3. The better off funding that the government had signalled, they've now said they will be reducing that. So what was previously expected to be received is lower. And also there's been a signal from central government that with the recent flooding events, some of the external funds that we would have expected would have been potentially available are likely to be reduced or redacted. So we've had to reassess our assessment of what's likely to be received. So if we can go to the first slide. We've broken the funding down into 2 parts. One is what we're describing as external funding, which you previously approved, which was the government community grants, the waters reform and development contributions. And the other, for want of a better word, asset realisation and activity, airport activity, which is the focus of this report. So if we go to the next page, that brings through table 1 in the report on your agenda. It shows what was estimated in the LTPA as the external non-ratepayer sources, which at that time was 151.9, together with the 151.5 got you to the approved budget at that time, which was 303 million. And then we've shown a current estimate. We've shown that effectively sort of a gross current estimate, and then what we're describing as a risk weighted. So we've gone through each of the elements and said what's the likelihood given what we know about the environment that we're working in, and what do we think we might actually get. So that's really the column to look at, but it is aware that there might be both upside and downside, mostly upside. So the development contributions one there is higher than previous. It's because there's more work's been done on that, and we actually still think that 11.4 is conservative. It needs a bit more work on understanding how much growth, the length of time that growth will be able to be accommodated given the size of the facility, and what is new level of service as opposed to existing level of service for increased number of people. So we're expecting there might be a bit of an upside in that 11.4 figure. So when we look at that identifies that with rate funded debt at 151.5, and if you are to approve the recommendation and the other reports about the budget 306, leaves a shortfall of funding or funding required of 91.6. So that's sort of the overall picture. Just in there, the TECT has confirmed that 21 million. So you would have seen that recently and it's been now publicly announced. The better off funding of 12 is confirmed and received. So that's probably the key points in that slide. Then if we go to the next slide, that is table 3 out of the report, basically starts to look at what would be potential components to address the 91.6 that would be required. And so we've identified the asset realisation reserve. That's in the next report, so I won't speak to the detail around that other than to note that's here. And in that report, one of your decisions is about how you deal with debt. So this report shows both the gross figures in the middle column and the net of debt figures in the far right column. Airport activity, which I'll work through in a minute, and then it notes that there's still other funding opportunities. They're currently noted as nil. That's not to say we think they're nil, but we just not enough specificity at this point, but there is quite a lot of more work going on to explore and realise other opportunities. So again, some upside risk there. But under both of those scenarios, the total funding identified exceeds the total non-rates funding required of the 91.6. So I think that's probably the key point of that slide, that there are sources if you choose to make decisions to pursue those. And in total, they exceed what is the funding that's required. So that's probably the key point in that one. So then we move on to the airport activity funding elements. So what we did with the airport activity is we looked at all activities across council that weren't ratepayer funded and identified which of those activities had a linkage to the city centre in terms of what they do, and in particular which ones would have some relationship with Te Manawa-Taki Otipapa. We then looked at, was there any funding available that could be applied, and the only one really was the airport with a potential of 45 million. And then once we got to that point, then we asked ourselves, well, is it appropriate? And if so, at what level would it be appropriate to apply funding that's sourced through the activity of the airport to Te Manawa-Taki? So we did an appropriateness assessment, and that's really the next 4 bullet points. We had to take into account the requirements of the Airport Authorities Act. We looked at the level of airport patronage from international and domestic tourism visitors. So looked at the throughput to the airport and said, of those people coming through Tauranga Airport, how many of those are international visitors and how many of those are domestic tourism, rather than people, so excluding people who live in Tauranga or who are in the surrounding region who would likely travel by other means. They don't come here by an airplane, so we need to take that into account. We took the work that Edward spoke to this morning around visitors. So he'd done a lot of analysis around visitors and had split them by international, domestic, outside of the region, domestic within the region, and then within the Tauranga city area. So for each facility, we could then look at who was coming to those, what was the projected numbers of visitors to those facilities internationally and domestically outside of Tauranga region. And then we did some work to say, well, how would the airport benefit and what might be some of the factors, and then did an assessment based on that. So that was the work that we did. We then took a conservative approach rather than an estimated approach. So we effectively discounted it to say this is still, based on a series of assumptions. So we took a discounted approach. We had our methodology reviewed independently, and the view was that the approach that we've adopted in the methodology was sound. And there have been some preliminary conversations with Air New Zealand. They've indicated support for the proposal in principle. They've noted that Te Manawa-Taki Otipapa would grow the inbound market and that it's good for the local economy. So there's still further work to be done in consultation with them, and that's reflected in the recommendations, but certainly a very strong positive signal as an initial conversation with Air New Zealand. So I think we'll move on to the next slide. The other matter that's covered in the report is the infrastructure funding and financing opportunities. So one of the things being explored as to whether the ratepayer share could be funded via a sort of community amenity IFF levy. If that looks like it might be a viable option, then that will come back to council for a subsequent decision. So it's not a decision you've been asked to make today. And it would, just as the transport, infrastructure financing and funding went through a public consultation process, so would that at a future point in time. So I've just noted it there, so it's complete in the report, but not a decision for now. So the resolutions that are proposed for you today to reconfirm that maximum ratepayer loan for the capital cost of 151, to note that we seek to maximise external funding, and only where that external funding and the ratepayer loan is insufficient at a point in time, while we continue to actively explore those opportunities, at that point in time, then the balance to be funded by a mix of or airport authority funding and asset realisation. And to note that those decisions on the scale of that funding and any further consultation or further legal considerations, that you'll make that via a subsequent council resolution at that time. And we're expecting that's probably not until around about year 3 of the construction. But as was discussed this morning, there's still further work to happen on the cash flow that's expected later in the year. And once that cash flow for the capital work's done, you can then align the funding to it, and then you'll know the earliest possible time that you would need to consider these issues, these quantums, and to decide what needs to be allocated. So it's probably the key points that I want to make. Happy to answer any questions.
Christine, so first of all, I think I would like to acknowledge TECT as our, trying to think of the term, founding funder. 21 million is an enormous amount of money to contribute to the project, and I understand it's the biggest donation they've made to a regional development project and needs to be recognised as such. But for us, I think it is a really strong recognition of the importance of the project, and then expresses their confidence in the project, because it wasn't so long ago that they weren't at all confident in TCC. And so we've come a long way, and I know the staff have done a lot of work to get us to this point. But as we've heard and talked about so many times today, making decisions and then getting on with actually delivering on those decisions counts a lot. And so to my colleagues, to my commissioner colleagues, I think we've shown over the last 2 years enough that an organisation like TECT has confidence that when we make a decision, we get on with delivering on those decisions. And that's really, really critical. So, yeah, that public acknowledgement of TECT, and thank the trustees very much for that. The second comment I'd make is I think you've been really conservative. If we only get 14 million from government to a city, the 5th largest city, that's not really put its hand out for help with anything like a museum or big community facilities, then they are really miserable, because Tauranga is owed. And there used to be a thing called the Regional Museums Fund that museums like Dunedin dipped into, Rotorua dipped into. Unfortunately, Tauranga didn't, but it is time that Tauranga got some assistance from central government to provide some cultural facilities. And so I'm hoping that we would get at least 3 times that much from central government. However, I understand the desire to be conservative, and I just think by having written it down, we run the risk of them saying we'd be happy with that amount. So I just wanted on record that I wouldn't be happy with that amount. And the other thing I would say is through local grants, and the desire by, and we've seen it in so many ways in the city, where the private citizens get together and actually fund facilities that should have been provided by council. And I think of probably the Millennium Trust with the athletics track, Bay Oval. And so we know that there are people in this city that want to see it go ahead and will be happy to contribute. So again, I think that's a very conservative amount of money that we hope to get from local and community grants. But other than that, I've got no further questions. We'll come to the resolutions after we've heard from Simon, with the asset realisation reserve, but I just note that there are 3 attachments to this report that will be dealt with in public excluded for the reasons on the agenda. Stephen.
I agree with your comments about other government grants at 14 million. I think there is definitely more work to be done, and possibly some of the work that might be done is to do some regional or other city comparators in terms of what has been contributed to various projects across other parts of the country, as compared, and social and cultural projects in particular, as compared to what Tauranga has received to date. And given that we are the 5th largest city, one would expect our fair share of whatever government funding is available. The other missing gap for me is the kind of the regional contribution, because the reality that this is going to be a regional facility, certainly sub-regional, where citizens of Western Bay and indeed the wider region will come to the city centre and value and draw value from it. And I think it's right and proper that there's a more significant, well, in fact, we don't even note any regional contribution at the moment. And I think that's definitely an area that we need to have a conversation with our neighbouring councils, because this is part of building the heart not only of Te Papa, but of Tauranga and of the region. And so it's appropriate that those who benefit contribute. So I think the numbers are conservative, but I think it's right that they are conservative. And what it clearly shows is that we do have a variety of funding paths that we can explore, but we have some confidence that we've got some backstop funding if and when required. So cut it either way, even in a conservative environment, we can expect to have enough funding coming through to be able to fund this investment. And that should give confidence not only to us as commissioners, but to the future council coming in, that we haven't left them with a debt legacy. We've actually got a very clear funding strategy for this project, that they can have confidence that they can continue the work that started today. So on that basis, I'd be very happy to move the recommendation at the appropriate time.
Well, the recommendation at this stage is that we receive the report. So you're happy to move that?
Happy to move that.
Thank you. You second it, Bill? Do you want to make any comment? Ask any questions? Chad.
Just a quick question, Christine. You mentioned about the better off funding. So I think it was $48 million that the Crown had committed, particularly to Tauranga City, and we've received the 12. I understand that the balance is no longer on the table for us to access.
And as well, but I'll probably check with Catherine. She's nodding, so that's a good sign.
Yes, it wasn't announced by Prime Minister Hipkins, but I think it was in his actual press release that they were repurposing that money to support the 10 or 11 entities.
There was some talk subsequent to that because of some pushback from a variety of mayors around the country, that the government might relook at that decision, but I haven't heard any outcome of that since.
Well, it is most unhelpful when a government promises stuff and then doesn't deliver. Doesn't matter what colour the government is. Okay, so the recommendation then is that we receive the report, Financial Strategy Te Manawataki o Te Papa. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So now we will go to the asset realisation reserve.
So again, I've just a really short presentation, and then Simon and I can respond to any questions. So if we just flick our way through to... So this report really covers 3 key decisions. We're asking, one is for the council to consider their proposal to establish an asset realisation reserve approach and the criteria and the way that that reserve would operate. A decision to be made about how you would treat debt, which is associated with properties that are managed through the reserve, and approval on a list of properties that you would make the decision would be managed through the reserve. So those are the three key decisions of the report. So then we move to the next slide. So what we're proposing here is that you have a reserve and that it forms a mechanism to transparently manage all the sale of council's property and assets. At the moment, there's a bit of a hybrid with properties sitting in a range of activities, but managed partly by the property team and partly in other teams. It's not probably the easiest to identify them all, would be the polite way of putting it. So we're suggesting that they be transparently identified and managed, that once those properties and assets are sold, any proceeds from those is put into the reserve, and then council, again, by way of a transparent resolution, makes a decision to allocate funds that have been realised to particular capital projects as you wish. It's just noting that the decision to manage properties through the reserve approach is not necessarily a decision to dispose. It may be for some quite simple property sales, but there are some that are more complex and significant in nature. By passing the resolutions today, you're not making the final decisions to sell those. You are commencing a process, and there's a resolution for staff to start working on them. They would come back to council, and normal council policies would apply. So that's that one. The next one. So within the report, we've described how we would go about the assessment process, and that's been done for this first tranche. So they are assets that aren't required to deliver the core business, or we can deliver business in a different way. They are ones that we're recommending could be disposed of, and that's either internally or external, to achieve a strategic objective, and where there is a defined trigger or a defined timeline. So it's not something that we're saying would be sold one day. We'll be able to describe what is the event or the time frame when that disposal would be able to proceed, so that there's some real clear definition of these properties. So the properties that are recommended, and Simon can speak to any of the detail around these, is the car parks and the marine precinct. So they were what was already been indicated through your decisions in the LTPA. Smith's Farm, which you've made some recent decisions in public council meeting about disposal. Potorifi, which you've already consulted with the community on and made subsequent decision around a mix of residential and non-residential land. It's only the residential portion that's recommended to move into here. And then a suite of other council properties that are owned by council that meet those two assessment criteria. We have shared the recommended list with the Rangapu and made it really clear to them that if council does proceed and pass these resolutions, that those properties would go through the normal disposal and acquisition policy approach. So just move to the next slide. There are a number of policy and legal considerations. I've just tried to colour code them to make it a little bit easier. So the blue is current existing council policy and the green is legal. So currently proceeds from property that sits in an activity, the proceeds from that sale would go into that activity, and proceeds from those sales would be used to repay debt. And then the next bit below, the Treasury Policy Council can make a decision by way of resolution where any asset sales proceeds to use that other than debt repayment. So one policy says the first point of call is debt repayment, but another policy says you can choose to do that differently by way of resolution. And then in terms of the proceeds returning to an activity, it is up to council's discretion whether or not you wish to apply any of your policies, and if you choose to do something that's inconsistent with the policy, you can do that. You just need to be transparent. You need to describe why you're doing it, and you need to make a decision as to whether or not in the future you will amend your policy to take account of that decision that you've made. And so you'll see that those matters are addressed in the recommended resolutions. Next slide. There are another couple of other matters that are addressed in the report. One is that we're recommending that there'll be an annual review of all properties, just to that there's a frequent refresh, that we do assess every asset that you do identify to be managed through this process on a case by case, that we would do that in accordance with the legal requirements and also the specific policies. And then the final bullet there is linked to the financial strategy report that you've just considered, that you would approve a resolution that the reserve be used as a funding source for Te Manawataki Otipapa project in the first instance. That's probably a quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Christine, any questions in there? I think this is a really good move, regardless of whether we were sitting around the table talking about funding Te Manawataki or Te Papa. I think this is a really good change for council to make, because I think one of the questions we raised when we first came is, you know, what are the, when we're looking at the balance, what are the assets? Where are the assets of council, and what should be maintained and what shouldn't? And it was scattered throughout the organisation. So this brings it all together in a very transparent way, and I think it's a really significant move for the council. So thanks for the work. I know Simon's worked really hard to dig them all out. I'm counting on you to have really dug deep. So I don't have any questions because it's all pretty logical, and Christine, you've gone through all the recommendations so that we are clear, and I think the public's clear on what's trying to be attained by this move. Bill's happy to move. So yes, so we will be moving, first of all, the recommendations from the asset realisation reserve paper on page 89. So Bill's moving those and Shad is seconding. Any questions? Yep, Stephen.
Not a question, but just a comment. This is good governance. This is about understanding what assets the council has and whether or not it is using those assets to best advantage. And in this case, in terms of the use of the asset realisation reserve potentially to part fund the investment in Te Manawataki or Te Papa, it's a question of recycling capital from one asset and investing in it in another asset that is going to provide better value in total than sitting on a whole bunch of sundry assets under a whole bunch of administrative departments. So the point you make about transparency of the asset ownership, the annual review of whether or not we're using those assets to best advantage, and then recycling those assets so that to make sure that we are, is good governance. It's what we should be doing anyway, but it just brings it to the fore, and once again provides a sound foundation for the incoming council to understand what they've got and how best they can manage it.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I'd just like to add that from my perspective, this is going to achieve a really good outcome for council. We will now have a property centre of excellence built within the council that we can extract highest and best use from our properties. So I'm very pleased with the outcome, notwithstanding what's happening with Te Manawataki o Te Papa.
Certainly provided that backstop for Te Manawataki or Te Papa, but going forward, it does make best use. There's a lot of money tied up in council assets, and it enables, as you say, the incoming council to be sure that they're getting best value from that investment. Okay, so just again noting that there are two attachments in to this report that we will deal with in public excluded. So it's been moved and seconded. That's the asset realisation reserve, and that's approving the creation of that. And then the recommendations, there's a whole list of them, A to J, on with a number of those decisions that are identified through the report. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Simon. And then we go back to the financial strategy. And we pick up the resolutions there, the recommendations there, which is B, approving the financial strategy, C, noting the decision on the quantum of airport activity and or asset realisation reserve funding to be applied to Te Manawa Take o Te Papa will be made by subsequent resolutions of council, confirming that we consider that sufficient funding will be available to proceed with Te Manawa Take o Te Papa, and then retains attachments 1 and 2 in confidential to maintain legal professional privilege, and transfers attachment 3 into open when consultation and any negotiation with those direct stakeholders is complete. That's on the airport. So, Shad, you happy to move that? Bill, happy to second it? Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. That brings us then to 11.6, Te Manawa Take o Te Papa Willis Bond Development Management Agreement. Oh, right, sorry, I beg your pardon, Yep, so we've got H and I of the, I've lost my place now, of the design and, yep, it is too. Go back the other way. Yep. So we're going back to the design and cost update report, and that's H, the delegates to the Chief Executive authority to enter contracts on behalf of Council to deliver Te Manawa Take o Te Papa on Site A. Program of works is outlined in that report, subject to the endorsement by Te Manawa Take o Te Papa Board Limited, sufficient funds and condition of commercial sensitivity will be resolved, and then transfers attachment 2 into the open when contract negotiations are complete. Shad, you happy to move that? Stephen seconded. Any discussion? Seems like a long time ago when we looked at that paper. Yeah.
And certainly from my point of view, I put significant weighting also in terms of the endorsement that Kim outlined before from the Manawa Take o Te Papa board. I think that's significant, and I also certainly appreciated the way that they have gone through in a very deliberative manner to look at all the elements that we've had before us today, and actually signalling that continued drilling in and focus as this project implementation occurs. So I just want.
Okay. Nothing more? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we get to Te Manawa Take o Te Papa Willis Bond Development Management, and nice to see you, David.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Essentially, we're talking about the next stage in the evolution of the relationship with Willis Bond contractually. All of the work done to date by Willis Bond has been underpinned by the partnering agreement and with bespoke contractual arrangements for the work that they've overseen to this point. So the development management agreement is a more sophisticated consultants agreement, effectively. So you'll recall under the partnering agreement, it was envisaged that Willis Bond would be the developer and you would have a development agreement, but because the context has now changed, they are the delivery vehicle, so therefore they have a development management contract. The agreement itself was founded on the Takina agreement between Wellington City Council and Willis Bond for the delivery of the conference centre, and we used that as the template given that both parties were satisfied with the workings of that agreement. And it's entirely consistent to have an agreement in place like this for something of this scale, particularly because it gets into the detailed scoping of their role and a very clear set of processes and obligations that give both parties a lot more clarity as we work with them over time. We think that it's got a set of processes that enhance the transparency of the various steps and stages that the project needs to work through. We think it's got a very robust communication process binding forms of process, and of course there's a focus on performance. We've also, as Kim mentioned earlier, independently tested the scope of the and form of the fee, and we're entirely satisfied that it's appropriate. You'll note in the report, which I should have started by saying we take as read, that the agreement is also consistent with the principles of the partnering agreement. We thought it was really important to see these carry through into this next stage. My final comment really is that this DNA is really the realisation of what council sought when it procured a development partner. And when you see the quality of the presentation today, the narrative around all of the things that have taken place over time, and then we see the performance of Willis Bond living those values that really are all about the expectation of expertise, surety, and mitigating risk. And so I think back to that time that decision was made, and it was a good decision. And this is just the next evolution of that relationship. So we wholeheartedly support the recommendations in this paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, David. I'm glad you added that last piece to your commentary, because I think we examined that relationship quite strongly when we first came in. And we heard earlier today from a former councillor who opposed it vehemently. But I think it's fair to say that throughout the whole process, we've been impressed with that wider expertise that a national operator like Willis Bond has been able to bring to the table, and this has been done at some pace, and they've been able to tap into that wider national expertise that they've been able to call on, and with various moving parts. I also want to compliment you because you've worked on this for a long time. And it must be a good day for you to see it coming to some sort of conclusion where we're now talking a development contract. So thank you very much. You've given us very wise advice from time to time when we've asked you for it, and to have your guiding hand still there is some comfort to us. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anne. That's very kind. And it's also a moment, I guess, to recognise all those people in council who, over the years, who are still here or have since left us, have contributed an enormous amount. So this is it's a good milestone day.
Okay. Any questions for David or Graham? No? Someone like to move? So we're receiving the report and delegating to the Chief Executive to enter into that development management agreement on behalf of Council for the delivery of Te Manawa-Take o Te Papa, and you're seconding it? Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. It's carried. And that brings us to Tauranga Moana Waterfront.
This feels like a relatively short coda to a long symphony of papers that we've had today. So happy to table the report as read and just answer any questions. It's a simple update on where we're at from a design point of view, and happy to answer any questions.
So the main changes for the benefit of anyone, my colleagues and anyone else watching, is the position of the whare-waka, which is moved, and the addition of another set of toilets, public toilets at that end of the reserve of the strip, and probably the changes to the crossings over the railway. The vehicle crossing from the roundabout at the end of, at the junction of the Strand and Devonport Road there. There's been a fair bit of talk down that end of the table.
The vehicle crossing was always in the master plan, which was adopted in September last year. The addition or the relocation of the whariwaka and the new toilet are the main changes to the master plan.
Yep, Bill.
Just a clarification, Michael Gareth, in terms of, and on page 110, para 7, it talks about the master plan, including from Dive Crescent car park to the Matapihi rail bridge. I also presume, though, that the connection for that first stage of the walkway connects up into Tunks Reserve. I just wanted to double check that.
It certainly does.
I'm very happy to move the recommendations, and I think the waterfront development looks fantastic. And credit to you and the committee that have worked on that. If you wanted a kind of better way to marry the waterfront with the Civic redevelopment, I don't think you could have found a better one. I think it looks amazing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that done because I think it's going to be fantastic for the city right across. And an attraction, maybe not quite up to the mount, but not far behind it.
Happy to see it.
You see that playground. Okay, anything else? I moved and seconded. Shad.
I know this is kind of the last paper in the suite of papers that we've been deliberating on today. But I do kind of want to make a point, I suppose, that, and John kind of raised it at the beginning about debate, and Stephen's talked about good governance. Right from when the Commission came on, we were directed to exhibit what good governance might look like for a city. And through this process, particularly in this process itself, when we started and when we were presented with Te Manawataki o Te Papa, and we had the tour and saw the mould and saw the vacant buildings, all those kinds of things, and these papers kind of help step us through those decision-making processes over the last 18 months, I think, when I think back over it. And we've tested, we've pushed, we've pulled. We've got a great team. We've gone out to externals. We've pulled in external governance to provide that oversight and assurance in terms of the decisions that we make. And this is quite a significant decision. The suite of decisions, if you were to package them all together, and we have packaged them together, in terms of taking Te Manawataki to the next stage. And that's on behalf of our community. We did test with the community the idea of rebuilding the Civic Centre. We engaged with mana whenua to resolve some of those deep underlying issues. And so this is quite a significant day for us, putting drawing a line in the sand and saying we are committing to this and we are going to deliver this. And from a governance perspective, yes, planning, making sure we've got good advice, making sure we understand the costs, the benefits, making sure we take the community with us on this journey, and then being able to deliver on it. So I just want to commend Marty and the team, both internal and external, in terms of what we've delivered today.
Just add a further point too, is in terms of the four of us as commissioners, over the last 18 months have chaired this respective steering groups in terms of all of the components of Te Manawataki o Te Papa. So, we have been over this and been able to drill down all of us individually in that chair role. So it's not just receiving information in the public context. We've been able to probe, question and provide direction over that last 18-month period. I think that's also been key in terms of arriving at where we are today in terms of that level of understanding and in terms of then how that comes together as a package.
Yep, well said, both of you. I was just going to add in, the only thing I agreed with John Robson this morning was that it is quite complex to understand the funding structures for this, for the waterfront, because part of it comes out of Te Manawa-Taki o Te Papa, part of it comes out of roading, and part of it we'd already committed through the long-term plan. And so at some stage we probably need to have a full picture of that. Today wasn't the day to do that. It was really making sure that everyone understood the changes that have been made. But that's the only one. We've had it before. It's not as if we haven't had it before, but it wasn't as clear in these papers, perhaps. So you know, we need to do that. So before we close up, I do want to acknowledge, sitting at the back of the room is a man by the name of Dean Flavel, who's been waiting more than 20 years for this decision to be made. And as we close today, and he sat through the whole thing from this morning to now, and I want to acknowledge the work that has gone into getting us where we are today, not the least being the last 2 years where we have opened some of our taonga up to the community. And I know that's been a lot of work, but it has paid, because it has shown us just how interested people are in the taonga that's in a couple of warehouses out the back of the mount. But there are staff members who have waited a long, long time for these decisions to be made, and Dean's one of them. I did want to acknowledge him. And on that note, I'll put the motion then on the waterfront in Masonic Park report. We receive the report and the updated master plan, and note the location of the whariwaka and the new additional toilets. You want to also note where that basketball court's being moved to from its current position in Dive Crescent. Okay, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. So we have no late items now. Public excluded session. Would someone like to move that we go into public excluded for the reasons on the agenda? Shad and Bill. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much to the members of the public that have sat with us through this really momentous day for Tauranga City. Thanks to the media. Appreciate your efforts.